Hey everyone, how's it going? Thanks so much for inviting me to speak at this event. Really wish that I could be there in person. Web3 Lagos looks like it's going to be a great foundational event for the Lagos community and for the Nigerian community. Really hope to be able to be there next year. The title of my talk is How Crypto Can Regenerate the World. I want to talk about some of the more pro-social uses of crypto in this talk, and I want to talk about how we can use crypto to fund public goods, infrastructure that's traditionally provided by governments, things that are non-excludable and non-rivalrous, and are things like climate solutions, environmental solutions, open source software, things like that, things that are not traditionally having business models in the old market, and how I think we can fund them with crypto. So that is what my talk is about today. I hope that you enjoy it. So for those of you who do not know me, I am Kevin Owocki. I am one of the co-founders of Gitcoin, which is a crowdfunding product and protocol that has funded $50 million worth of public goods for the world. And Greenpill.network. Greenpill.network is a podcast that comes out on every Tuesday, Thursday, and it is dedicated to highlighting the more pro-social uses of crypto. Check it out at Greenpill.network if you want to learn more about that. So in this talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about the target state, what I think that we could build with crypto, how do we do coordination. A lot of these not funding of public goods are examples of coordination failures. So how do we at scale use crypto in order to regenerate the world, starting with our local communities, and how do we do it right? And then we'll close from there. So I think that the target state for what I want to build in this space is what I call regen. So basically regen stands for regenerative, a system that goes up in resource availability over time, as opposed to degenerative, a system that goes down in resource availability over time. So people call themselves degen in the space if they do a lot of just gambling in like pool twos or something like that. Regens are more focused on resource availability going up. And I think an important part of that is building ecosystems that are not fragile. So fragile ecosystems hit a shock event and then they go down over time. But building ecosystems that are anti-fragile, which means they hit shock events and they go up in resource availability. So a regenerative system, not only regenerating financial capital, but keeping in mind that there are 8 different types of capital. So basically social capital, material capital, financial capital, living capital, intellectual capital, experiential capital, spiritual capital, and cultural capital. So when I talk about what kind of financial system we could build with crypto, I think that we want to build a regenerative system on many different types of capital, not just on financial capital. So this talk is going to be, how do we take the future and how do we pull it from this projected future that's the current course that we're on and move it more into the plausible or possible adjacent future that is more regenerative. So how do we use crypto to regenerate our local communities and to regenerate the world is the target state of this talk. And another way of orienting this thinking is to talk about how do we use this technology to solve coordination failures, the things that we all agree are good and that we all rely on, but they don't have a business model. And so we haven't been able to fund them in the past. Things like open source software funding. This whole ecosystem relies on open source software. So it'd be logical that we wanted to fund it all, but since the source code's available for free, it's very hard to monetize. AI alignment, obviously a big one in the news with OpenAI having just came out. Preventing climate change, preventing biodiversity collapse, preventing surveillance tech and authoritarian government are the coordination failures that I think about. I'm sure that every nation and peoples on Earth have their own coordination failures that they think about in their local communities. And I'd be curious for the audience members, what comes to mind in Lagos and in Nigeria? What coordination failures do you want to solve out there? Every nation on Earth has public goods that they need to fund. So public goods are things that are non-excludable, which means that I can't exclude you from consuming a good, and non-rivalrous, which means that you consuming a good does not stop me from consuming a good. So basically, every nation on earth has to fund their national public goods in order to provide infrastructure for their citizens. So in what way could we use crypto in order to fund public goods for every nation on earth? Um, so this is like a map of what I like to think about when I think about public goods, and I know that it looks a little bit complicated, but basically the idea here is that there's different public goods at different apertures. So basically, we have global public goods, things like herd immunity and climate, and then we have nation state public goods, things like economic development, social welfare systems. Sometimes the military is public good for their citizens, sometimes they're not. City state public goods, local public goods would be something that are local to Lagos, to Nigeria, to like things like community centers, roads and bridges, and schools. And what I think is interesting is that only one half of this pie is really physical public goods. You've also got digital public goods, things like crypto public goods, and then you've got digital public goods, things like web servers or Python packages and stuff like that. So these are all different types of goods that are non-excludable and non-rivalrous. And we want to pull ourselves into the possible adjacent future in which we're funding those things. So how can crypto regenerate the world? Our target state is we're building a regenerative economy that funds our public goods. One of the things that I think is an easy way to orient myself when I'm thinking about this is to use something called holons. So basically, a holon is something that's simultaneously a whole in itself and also part of a larger whole. So I'm a human, part of a team that founded Gitcoin, and is part of the Ethereum movement, which is part of the crypto industry, which is part of a global ecosystem. Likewise, each individual sitting in the audience right now is a human in Lagos, which is a holon, in Nigeria, which is a holon, which is part of the world, which is a holon. So when we're thinking about funding public goods, we can think about the public goods at each of the levels of these holons and up and down the holarchy. So coordinating at scale, but also in our local villages, going up from like a family to a kin network to a village to a community to a state. These are all connections between holons, where each holon is a part of each other holon. One of the things I really like about this this thinking is not only does it allow you to separate concerns from global public goods to everyday public goods, but it sort of breaks the duality of the individual's needs and the collective needs. Each individual, if you look at them as a holon, is just a collective of individual cells or organs, and vice versa. So what I like about it is that it allows us to break this duality of individualism and collectivism when it comes to funding our public goods. Okay, so basically, I think Web3 is the ultimate coordination power tool. Our legacy institutions for supporting public goods, for coordinating and solving coordination failures in these holons, are opaque, unaccountable, inefficient, and often centralized, and have hierarchical power structures, which means that they do not see the situations on the ground. Web3 provides a better coordination substrate because we can build transparent, uncorruptible, programmable, and permissionless coordination mechanisms. So I think Web3 is a coordination power tool that is going to allow us to fund public goods within these holons. So basically, we can build coordination mechanisms that allow us to fund public goods and then distribute funding to these public goods within these ecosystems. So you can fund public goods with things like donations, or if you're Ethereum, then you've got a pre-mined block of transactions that go into your wallet, which you use to distribute to public goods. And then there's distribution mechanisms that are also being innovated right now, things like quadratic funding, retroactive public goods funding, and conviction voting from there. So, I think that Gitcoin, my work, is an example of this. Gitcoin is a funding mechanism and a distribution mechanism for funding public goods within these ecosystems. And one of the things that I think is really cool about the Ethereum ecosystem is that we now have multiple funding and distribution mechanisms that are on top of each other. in the ecosystem. So they all work to fund public goods in a different way within the Ethereum ecosystem right now. And one of the things that I think is important about this is it's got the Unix philosophy style architecture here, where each funding or distribution mechanism does one thing well, and it interoperates well with other funding and distribution mechanisms in the community. So this is what it looks like in the Ethereum ecosystem. If you followed Optimism and retroactive public goods funding there, you know that they're funding $20 million worth of ecosystem public goods using retroactive public goods funding. DAO Drops is doing 250K per quarter of retroactive public goods funding. Gitcoin has done $50 million so far of public goods funding. ClearFund, another quadratic funding tool, has done $3 million. Giveth is doing on the order of millions of dollars. And Protocol Guild, which is a self-curating registry of Ethereum protocol developers, is doing around $10 million per year of funding of the ecosystem public goods. So I think that we're proving in the Ethereum ecosystem that public goods can be funded with crypto. And I'm really excited about how these things connect with each other, not in just that they're interoperable with each other, but we're starting to see people put together funding aqueducts. So you can imagine that you've got a DAO that relies on all these different public goods, and you maybe take an equal percentage of your treasury and allocate it to Optimism and Protocol Guild and DAO Drops and Gitcoin from there. Or you can do really interesting things like build opinionated funding aqueducts where you have governance weighted position percentages that go to each of these different public goods funding mechanisms out there, or maybe even more complicated funding aqueducts that are composed of different ways of funding public goods. Another thing that I think that we've seen in this space that's sort of interesting in how this whole layer of funding public goods composes is that there's now hundreds of DAOs out there with millions and sometimes billions of dollars of treasury. And the DAO to DAO relationships that are forming in the space are somewhat interesting. So you've got basically, I think, 3 layers to a DAO to DAO relationship. You want to have a social layer in the relationship. So basically sponsorships and hanging out, giving a talk at each other's events, I think is an example of a social layer relationship. And then you've got technology interop, which is like, hey, I'll use your technology. If you're Uniswap, I'll use Uniswap. And if you're Gitcoin, I'll use Gitcoin. If you're Optimism, I'll use Optimism. And then you've got economic interop, which is, hey, let's let the tokens flow between these 2 projects. And maybe that'll mean a token swap. Maybe that'll mean joining an aqueduct together or something of that nature. And so one of the things that really excites me about how these DAO to DAO relationships are composed is how they stack on top of each other holonically. So basically, as more and more DAOs enter into these relationships with each other, social, economic, and technical, they're going to start stacking on top of each other until you have this like mesh network of incentives in which the whole ecosystem rises and falls together, not only because it's on Ethereum together, but because there's so many relationships with each other. And I think this is going to matter because we're all going to be in this economic fabric in between these different DAOs. And holonically, we'll be part of many of these different holons, and we'll be benefiting from each of their successes. So, I am Kevin Owocki, which is part of the holon that is ETH Denver, the Denver community, and you're probably in a holon that's part of the Lagos Ethereum community. If you're at Web3 Lagos, we're all part of the Ethereum ecosystem. Some of us are part of Gitcoin DAO and some of the events that they're doing. So when you think about this economic fabric right here, think about where you are in that. You benefit from Ethereum, you benefit from Gitcoin, you benefit from Optimism and all of the layer 2 technology that's happening. So this mesh network of public goods that are being built in this DAO to DAO fabric is going to be benefiting everyone. And what I'm really excited about is this density of public goods funding, how it's going to scale. So this graph right here is I know a lot, but this is a holonic view of civilizational scale. So all the way up from atoms and molecules and cells and organs and up to persons, and then families, and then local communities, city, town, village. You guys are in Lagos right now, in Nigeria, on planet Earth. So what are the ways in which there are coordination failures at each of these levels of holons? One of the most profound, I think, things that I think when I visualize this slide is that cancer is just a coordination failure of cells in which one cell gets on this runaway loop where it consumes too many resources just to reproduce itself. And that's a coordination failure at the cellular level. Crime at the local community level is a coordination failure, and climate change is a coordination failure at the global level of public goods. And so, in what ways can we build economies with Web3 that help solve some of these coordination failures and are able to help us fund public goods within each of these ecosystems? And of course, it's sort of a silly question to ask in physical space right now, because we haven't really proven that Ethereum can do that yet. But when you start to look at how there are digital holons and digital public goods, we're all a member of probably multiple DAOs, and if we're not members of them, then we receive benefit from their technology. We're all a member of multiple social networks, Telegram groups, interest groups, the open source software that we use. So these holons that we're building in the digital ecosystem, I think that it's really interesting when you start to look at how much money goes to public goods in the digital public goods ecosystem. Right now, let's just take the market cap of crypto, which is like $1.2 trillion, and take a look at it. The geographic public goods, if you add up all of the taxation of governments across the world, is on the order of trillions of dollars. So what if there was a cross-pollination of mechanisms and money between these two sets of holons, the digital holon and then the physical holon? And what are the ways in which we could build a mesh network of incentives that helps fund public goods that is cross-pollinated between these two groups? And I think a great example of this is that Gitcoin just did a round of climate solutions funding on Gitcoin grants that are basically projects that are helping to reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere or serve as core infrastructure for climate solutions. So we're already starting to see this cross-pollination of Web3 infrastructure being used to fund global public goods, and it's bottoms up. It's through the market layer, and as opposed to top down and through the United Nations or government agendas. So that's sort of some of my early thoughts on how crypto can regenerate the world. And I think that in this talk so far, we've gone from what are public goods, why do they matter? There are things in your community that you care about and that you want to see funded, and then we talked about how these things are ultimately coordination failures. If we can find a way to build a mesh network of incentives across communities, then we're going to be able to recognize all of the different holons that we're in, and hopefully build a mesh network of incentives that funds public goods across the ecosystem. And we're all doing it in a pluralistic way. Gitcoin is one seat at the table, but we also have ClearFund and Giveth and Protocol Guild and many other great projects that are doing it. And I'm really just happy to be part of this movement today. I want to end by talking about Gitcoin Grant Stack, which is a next generation product that will allow anyone to create a quadratic funding round. So basically the same tech and the same playbook that Gitcoin follows in order to fund public goods for the Ethereum ecosystem, now anyone can do. You can go to manager.gitcoin.co and you can create a round from there and use Gitcoin grants in your local community. So I just go to manager.gitcoin.co, authenticate my MetaMask, and then let's say I wanted to create a round for open source software funding. I can go in here and just with a couple clicks create a round of quadratic funding and fund a holon. So basically Gitcoin 1.0 was fishing for you. Gitcoin 2.0 is teaching you how to fish. So we've got tons of resources for people who want to run a quadratic funding round in their local community. Soon this will support direct grants and milestone-based payouts, and I'm told a bunch of other coordination mechanisms out there. And we're really excited to support a growth of this vision of holonic public goods funding across the world for many causes across many scales. So you can go to manager.gitcoin.co to set up a round. You can join the Gitcoin Operators Guild, which is a community of Gitcoin operators, and you can get peer support for running these type of rounds in your local community. If you want to learn more, you can go to gitcoin.co/grantstack. I'm really excited about quadratic funding because Gitcoin has funded $50 million worth of public goods so far, and because it has because it's got 2 million data points about what people actually care about. I'm excited about the ability of Web3 to build bottoms up collective intelligence of what these communities actually care about. So basically, this is an economic graph of Gitcoin grants round. I think it's 14 here. And each graph, each node on the network is a person or a grant, and each edge in the network is a transaction between them. So basically, we're building a signal of what a community really cares about peer-to-peer and only funding those public goods. So much more signal goes into Web3 than I think goes into traditional type of mechanisms for funding public goods that are a little bit more industrial era and not scaled up to web scale. So what are the ways in which we can measure and scale out the amount of public goods that people care about across the world? So that is how we rotate attention and capital into regenerative projects. That is how we pull ourselves into a plausible adjacent future that is more about funding public goods. I think that this technology is going to allow us to scale to funding public goods at web scale. And that is my presentation for Web3 Lagos this year. So I hope that you got a little bit of vision out of this talk, how Web3 could be used in order to cross-pollinate an ecosystem of public goods funding across the world. I hope that you got a little bit of practice in here, how to do it using Gitcoin's software stack. And all in all, I hope that you enjoyed the presentation. Again, I really hope to be able to be at Web3 Lagos next year. It was a real honor to be invited to speak this year, and I can only hope that I'm able to make it in person next year to join you all in Lagos, Nigeria for this event. And I think that we're building a global movement here, and it's very special to me. I always pinch myself whenever I think about the fact that I'm just here in the United States with my family, and I'm able to just sort of be myself in somewhere across the world and hopefully educate them, inspire them, and commune with them. So if you have any questions, you can hit me up on Twitter. That's where I'm most active, and we'll respond to you, twitter.com/Owocki. And I invite you to join this global movement of using crypto to help regenerate the world. So you can tweet me at twitter.com/Owocki. I'd also ask, check out greenpill.network. That's the educational community that we're building in order to help crypto be used to build regenerative digital infrastructure in the world. We do have a chapter in Lagos, Nigeria. So if you're interested in joining that, that's another way that you can get involved in my work. All right, that's all I got. Thanks so much, and see you next time.